Let's see. Okay, our final question this week is from Keenan. Gut dysbiosis concerns on keto. Dear Rob, I appreciate very much your non-dogmatic approach when it comes to tackling information regarding very low carb and keto dietary approaches, i.e., who are you? What are your performance needs? Are you sick and busted up, a hard-charging athlete, etc.? That's why I feel you're the best person to ask about this, as you aren't inherently biased. It's a very nice compliment.
Very nice compliment.
I have a family history of cancer, depression, mental illnesses, addiction, and adult ADHD. I haven't been diagnosed with any of these issues, though I definitely deal with unevenness in mood and focus. Besides my interest in preventing any future health issues for which I might be at risk, I've found that a very low-carb, high-fat diet just seems to suit my brain the best. I'm less irritable and anxious, my sex drive is fine, and most importantly for me, my focus and attention is just totally on point. I've tried a multitude of eating styles, but very low carb is the only one that finds me springing out of bed in the morning with the birds chirping and excitement to get to work each day. I call it nature's Adderall, except I don't have any crazy stim-mania. The only thing holding me back from maintaining this approach is a nagging worry about the hypothetical implications of long-term very low carb as it pertains to GI microbiome diversity, potential dysbiosis risks, mucin production, thyroid problems, etc. I've read as much as I can find from the experts I tend to trust in this field, like Tia and D'Agostino, but I've yet to find anything that definitively quells my worry of causing some sort of damage from which it might be difficult to come back. Do you think the long-term risks might be overblown? I do take prescript assist and raw potato starch as potential mitigators, but I don't know if very low carb is taking a step or two back from my gut bugs, and I'm very concerned about treating them well. I always suspected gut problems being at the root of my late father's alcoholism and his myriad of inflammatory problems. Some of these worries have prevented me from staying in keto for longer than about a month at a time. Every time I start phasing a larger amount of carbs back in, however, there's a mild and annoying accompanying brain fog and up-down cycle, seemingly irrelevant of the dietary source. I understand that these questions get vetted and you're busy, so no worries if this one doesn't make the cut. I sincerely appreciate everything you and your team have done for my health and the health of my family, as well as the awareness you're raising regarding even larger political issues we're facing. Sincerely, Keenan.
Awesome. It's nice to know that what we're doing matters, even if it's one person. So, I guess first out of the gate, even after all that praise, I don't think I'm going to have a definitive answer to this. And so it's a complex topic, and I have to say it's been an interesting ride for me, because even though have been and primarily known as like the paleo guy, I was the paleo guy that always leaned much towards the low carb side of things, and man, I tried to get the kind of Boyd Eaton, Lauren Cordain ratios of paleo to work, and it just really didn't work for me. I didn't feel good. I had gut issues, brain fog, seemed to be up and down, and I've tried every iteration of this stuff, and then smart people like Paul Jaminet raise these questions about ketosis being problematic long term, like the loss of the mucin layer in the gut because of lack of dietary carbohydrate, and then the gut bacteria would say, well, if you're not going to feed me, I'm going to eat the gut lining, and then you lose this kind of like effectively like a mucus layer that is the real barrier between your body and the feces that's moving through it. There's kind of a mucus kind of layer there. And so I tried resistant starches and safe starches, and man, I really gave it the old college go, and I just felt terrible on it. Like, I tried everything. I did the potato starch, and I feel okay for a couple of days, and then it just absolutely crushed me. And I think we've talked about a couple of times the Sonnenberg lab, and they have some concerns around monocropping your gut microbiome around like one type of fermentable carbohydrate. So if you were to supplement with something, Dr. Perlmutter has a product through Garden of Life, that is a super diverse fiber blend. It has like citrus peel and acacia root and all this stuff. If I were going to do something, I would probably do something like that has kind of a broader spectrum kind of deal, but there've
I
only
think
been
you said before too, like swapping it out, like doing
Yeah,
some of this on
rotating.
rotating it,
Yeah.
so you're not doing the same.
same thing all the time. Yeah, I think that makes some sense. And again, I would just kind of pressure test it for, do you look, feel, perform better, and all that type of stuff. Particularly when you have this baseline of feeling really, really good when you're on very low carb, and then feeling significantly not good when you're not. It is a really interesting question, though. Is there something that we're giving up down the road for some gain that we have now? And I just don't know that anybody can answer that. There are some preliminary studies that suggest that very low carb diets, although they change the gut microbiota, they don't necessarily change them in a completely like dysfunctional way. There's some pluses and minuses, but some of the way that the gut changes would generally be associated with like beneficial flora. But even some of the ones that are considered to be not as beneficial, the researchers acknowledge that within the context of a low carb diet, it may not matter. Like things may change in that scenario. And again, for most people, we see improvements in blood lipids and blood glucose control. Not everybody across the board, but by and large, we tend to see that. And something that's frequently forgotten in this story is that if you construct a low carb diet properly, like things like artichokes and avocados and asparagus and stuff like that, you can get a remarkable amount of fermentable fiber and a very low glycemic load. So I've kind of had this notion that, try to eat your way out of ketosis using very low glycemic load carbohydrates, which means that you're just going to be eating a ton of them. But Keenan, I appreciate the kind words and the, kind of the faith that you have in us on this. But at the end of the day, I don't think that anybody has been able to put a definitive pin on this, because I think to some degree it depends on the person, depends on the circumstance. I tell you, it's really fascinating. Some of the research around, say, like the carnivore diet that is interesting in ketosis in general. So one of the big benefits that are sold around fermentable carbohydrate is that we release like butyrate and propionate and malonate and these short chain saturated fats, which is super cool. They appear to have these great signaling properties and whatnot, and they're ostensibly feeding some of the gut microbiota and also the cells lining the epithelial cells and what have you. But what's interesting is in the state of ketosis, beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is just a slightly modified version of butyrate, it translocates into the gut, and it feeds the gut microbiota and the epithelial cells. So that's a whole interesting thing that nobody was really considering, nobody was talking about. So maybe the endogenous state of ketosis is feeding the gut in a different way. Then the real mind blower flew by me not that long ago. A whole bunch of the amino acids can be fermented or converted into these short chain saturated fats, and tend to be preferentially driven that direction in a low carb environment. So the more we scratch around this stuff, like there was a paper that I was reading just a few days ago, and it made this case that the most important thing that you need to do, like where mistakes occur in science, is on the first page in the first paragraph in the assumptions. If the assumptions are wrong, then the whole thing goes completely sideways. And this is where, I think like this evolutionary health, ancestral health, paleo diet model is incredibly powerful as a hypothesis generating tank, but then we need to go out and then tinker and fiddle and see what the results are and whatnot. And most of the big gaffes, most of the big mistakes that have kind of occurred there were an outgrowth of wrong assumptions. And it's not because people are bad, but because you have an idea and you pressure test it and it just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Your hypothesis ends up being false, or there's some other nuance to it or something like that. Like one thing that comes to mind is Stefan Lindeberg's idea around dietary lectins and their potentially causal role in metabolic syndrome. And he has the whole Katava study that he talks about this, and it's really beautifully done, because he starts with kind of a anthropological observation. People in the West have rates of diseases that are different than this kind of Aboriginal culture. Then he does an epidemiological study. Then he does a study in animals. So he's got an animal model. And then he does a study in humans. And the thing is very consistent. And it really makes a case that these dietary lectins could be the underlying problem. But then a paper came out that suggested that acellular carbohydrate, refined carbohydrate, is actually the driver for all of this modern Western metabolic syndrome type stuff. And that fits all this story too. And so there was a great question asked around this, but it was asked in a way that wasn't specific enough to delineate whether lectins are the cause or whether acellular carbohydrate was the cause, or it may be a combination of both. Or in some people it may be lectins, and in other people it may be dense acellular carbohydrate. So, where we start with assumptions is a really important piece to this whole story. And again, I kind of side with some folks like Dr. Sean Baker. We can get so out in the weeds with like mechanisms and mTOR and all this stuff. And I think it just ends up being kind of bullshit at some point. We know for a fact that if we just don't overeat, if we exercise, if we sleep well, if we're generally feeling good, that good things are going to happen. And it's difficult to do anything else that's going to be any better for us, And so that's kind of where, and maybe I'm saying all this stuff to make myself feel better because I'm in a very similar situation. I tend to feel my best when I'm at that kind of peri-ketogenic level, and I've tinkered with that and found that I feel even better when my protein intake is higher. I've even kind of foregone a lot of the vegetable intake that I used to do because I noticed that my digestion was even better with certain types and the removal of others and making sure it's definitely cooked. So really focusing on that clinical outcome of do I look, feel, and perform better has been my primary driver.
Okay. Awesome. I think that was our final question this week.
Sweet. Anything else we need to tell people about?
I don't think so. I hope everybody's having an awesome summer.
Indeed. Stay hydrated with Drink Element.
Mm-hmm.
And
send us your questions at robbwolf.com on the contact page.
And still, I think, at least for a while, most of my activity on social media is going to be over at Instagram. Yeah. Might have some interesting developments around that topic here in the not too distant future. So, yeah.
All right, guys.
Take care.